It is early 2026, and the streets of Iran are burning. The unrest has fractured the entire country, reaching into all 31 of its provinces. Unlike the protests of 2022, which centered on socio-cultural demands, these are hunger riots. They are driven by absolute material deprivation. The immediate trigger was a sudden 200% price increase on subsidized flour and fuel. That shock hit a population where 75% of citizens have now fallen below the absolute poverty line. The Islamic Republic is suffering from systemic exhaustion, a simultaneous failure of its economic, environmental, and military foundations. And this collapse is colliding with a critical vacuum at the highest level of the state. Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been almost entirely absent from public view following the military conflicts of June 2025. For the first time in his 37-year tenure, his presence is receding. His looming death or incapacitation will force the Islamic Republic to navigate its first leadership transition in nearly 50 years. Any successor will assume control of a state failing on multiple fronts. This intersection of a leadership vacuum and structural decay suggests the current model of governance is facing an existential break. The ecological disaster unfolding across Iran is a permanent structural failure rooted in post-revolutionary ideology rather than a seasonal drought. In a relentless pursuit of agricultural independence, labeled food sovereignty, the government commissioned a massive infrastructure campaign that ignored hydrological reality. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps oversaw the construction of over 600 dams, actively diverting natural riverbeds to irrigate water-intensive crops in desert regions. The result is the complete eradication of major bodies of water. Lake Urmia, once the largest salt lake in the Middle East, is now a dry, cracked basin. Wind blowing across this newly formed desert generates toxic salt storms that devastate the health and agriculture of millions in the northwest. To compensate for surface water loss, millions of state-sanctioned and illegal deep wells have systematically drained the nation's underground aquifers. This groundwater depletion has triggered catastrophic land subsidence. The capital city of Tehran is physically sinking into the earth at a rate of 25 centimeters per year. Decades of ecological mismanagement have eradicated the state's ability to provide basic utilities like water, converting environmental failure into a direct catalyst for nationwide revolt. This environmental collapse runs parallel to a second fracture, the death of Iran's resilient economy. Following the reimposition of snapback sanctions in late 2025, international buyers withdrew and shipping restrictions tightened, slashing Iranian oil exports by 70%. Cut off from its primary hard currency, the Iranian rial entered a depreciation spiral, plummeting to 1.5 million to the dollar. To cover massive security payrolls, the central bank expanded the money supply, triggering a surge in inflation exceeding 50%. This rapid loss of purchasing power wiped out household savings, pushing the traditional urban middle class into a newly impoverished proletariat. Domestically compromised, the regime is simultaneously facing a third fracture, the disintegration of its primary geopolitical doctrine, forward defense. Iran projected power by cultivating proxy militias across the Levant, forming a geographic buffer. That architecture sustained a fatal blow with the Assad regime's collapse in 2024. The loss of Syrian territory severed the logistics corridor connecting Tehran to Lebanon. Following that geographic rupture, Iran's missile and nuclear deterrence suffered severe kinetic degradation during the 12-day war with Israel and the U.S. in June 2025. Stripped of its urban middle class and regional proxy network, the regime has lost its primary tools for internal stabilization and external intimidation. Iran must navigate a leadership transition precisely as its structural pillars are giving way. The formal constitutional mechanism for this transition rests with the 88 clerics of the Assembly of Experts. Their first option is managed continuity, which involves elevating a religious apparatchik already approved by the current supreme leader. The likely candidates for this path are deeply embedded religious functionaries who lack both national security experience and broad public support. Placing an untested bureaucrat in charge of a bankrupt, sinking state carries immense operational risk. The alternative is a shift toward a formal military takeover by the security services. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps already dominates key sectors of the Iranian economy and governing institutions. Formalizing that control is a logical progression. A militarized state would likely be led by senior regime figures with military service, who currently hold pivotal roles in the Defense Council and Parliament. Mohammad Bakr Kalibaf, the Speaker of Parliament and a former Guard commander, sits at the center of this potential post-clerical leadership. Neither clerical continuity nor military rule can solve the deep structural rot. The choice simply dictates whether the system suffocates through bureaucratic obsolescence or explicit authoritarian militarism. Active intelligence indicators suggest the transition process has already begun, visible through heightened media speculation on succession and rapid political bandwagoning among the elite. Facing this internal vulnerability, the regime has responded to domestic instability with maximum repression and widespread lethal force. This wave of extreme lethality mirrors the mass executions ordered during Ayatollah Khomeini's final months in 1989, used to reinforce control ahead of a transition. Relying on mass casualties against unarmed citizens signals the complete evaporation of ideological legitimacy. Brute force is the only mechanism left to delay collapse. This presents a severe strategic dilemma for Washington and its allies: how to engage with a heavily armed state undergoing systemic collapse. Direct intervention or attempts to actively shape the succession outcome carry catastrophic risks. The Iranian regime has historically thrived by weaponizing the legacy of Western interference, specifically the 1953 ouster of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, to rally hardline domestic support. Because the current leadership views any external threat as an existential danger, direct intervention could easily trigger desperate regional blowback. The required policy pivot for the U.S. and its allies means abandoning active attempts to shape the outcome in favor of aggressive mitigation. Militarily, this requires surging maritime and air defense assets across the Persian Gulf to deter any opportunistic proxy strikes during the transition. Diplomatically, it requires utilizing formal communication channels via Switzerland and regional partners like Oman. The specific message delivered through these back channels must set clear, uncompromising red lines regarding nuclear breakout attempts or hostage-taking. The convergence of crises in 2026 demonstrates that the revolutionary model of the Islamic Republic has reached a structural dead end. For the international community, the primary challenge has shifted toward managing the fallout as this heavily armed regional power begins to fracture.